Isn't that what a slave owner does as well? Do they not harvest energy?
Of course. And this is, what is a human being subject to a 100% tax rate? What is that?
I know where you're going with this, but where is there a 100% tax rate?
Anywhere there's ever been slavery.
Okay. I thought you were alluding to something else there. But what I'm saying is Libya. Libya has an active free market for slaves right now because of the breakdown. They had the complete breakdown they had in society since Gaddafi was deposed and killed. The US has a history of slavery. The UK has a history of slavery. Yeah,
humanity.
Yeah, humanity has a history of slavery. In a society like we have with rules, yes, we have taxation, which some people say is a form of slavery. If you're paying some tax, that's because it's coercion, it's a form of slavery. But if you had no taxation and no central government, there's every chance, a most likely scenario where we end back with some people who will have slaves. And I would argue that person has less liberty than you and I do under a democracy.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things here. One would be, first is the point on effective tax rate. Like, if your effective tax rate is 100%, you are by definition a slave. This is another one of those things that I don't think you can really argue about. People try to say it's a category error, you shouldn't compare them. One's like a guy in chains with a gun in his face.
I'm with you on that.
But it's like, and this is Ayn Rand's point, if a man cannot control the product of his own labor, then there are no other rights. Property rights are the foundation of all human rights.
What about partial control?
Well,
like I pay 50% tax.
Then you're 50% slave.
But I don't think I am.
Yeah.
I don't believe I'm a slave. I believe I contribute to society.
So I wrote about this in Masters and Slaves of Money too. Okay. And it's not to say you don't. I have an effective tax rate too. I don't think I don't contribute to society because of that. But I'm just saying.
Do you believe you should have an effective zero rate of tax?
I think all humans should have an effective zero rate of tax. When you define tax as non-consensual exchange, right? It's not to say you can't pay security providers fees for providing physical security or preserving private property rights, which is the entire point of government. We also throw around this term rule of law, but all rule of law grounds out in property as well. It's all about resolving conflict between humans over scarce resources. So this whole thing's based on property. The existence of the government, it exists for property. That's it. Both to preserve property rights, but then it has this paradoxical situation where it preys on your property rights to fund the preservation of property rights. So it's kind of a contradictory institution. A large contributor to the reason we evolved beyond direct visceral slavery is because of capital accumulation. That actually the more capital we accumulate as a species, the smaller portion labor becomes of the cost structure. So there's less incentive to be a slave owner in a high capital stock world. Whereas if there's no capital stock and we're all cavemen, right, just trying to survive from meal to meal, that there's much more of an incentive to be controlling of others, let's say, coercive.
I disagree. I think we move beyond slavery because of the evolution of democracy and certainly liberal democracies and the evolution of morality.
Yeah, and I think a lot of that's based on, especially in the West, the Judeo-Christian mythology, right? Inside of which democracy lives. And I'm not going to argue that, authoritarianism is better or equal to democracy. I'm not going to make that argument necessarily, but I think they both fall under the rubric of statism. Yeah. I don't think statism is a sustainable economic model for human beings. So we know this, for instance. We know the Austrian business cycle theory. You start to inflate the currency. You basically create distorted price signals, misallocation of capital, the boom and bust business cycle we're all accustomed to, right? All that's rooted into basically taxation via inflation in this case. The theory that I'm working with currently is that there are broader implications to that coercion, and that not only do we have a business boom and bust cycle, but we have a civilizational boom and bust cycle.
I agree.
So long as coercion has any attack surface whatsoever, I think it's like a coercive agent that gets into human affairs and spreads and destroys us, destroys our culture, destroys us psychologically. And I think that I'm seeing a lot of symptoms of that today. And that's what I was mentioning to you offline. It's like, I see the world driving off a cliff, and I'm concerned.
What if I said to you, I think there are natural evolutions of the way humans coordinate. And if whatever you did, whatever kind of structure you put in place, if you had the big red button to get rid of the government, I think you end up in one of three places. You end up in a democracy. You end up authoritarian, with give you like a Saudi Arabia style, or you end up with anarchy. But I don't believe anarchy is something like what the anarcho-capitalists hope it will be. I think it's something like Somalia.
I disagree. So again, back to the term.
But we have, 200 countries in the world? We've never had a natural evolution to the anarcho-capitalist world that the anarcho-capitalists want. Now, I understand they say, no, we've not had the tools, and now we have Bitcoin, we can have that. I don't see Bitcoin delivering what they want.
I do. Again, the word anarchy, very bad connotation. People think anarchy literally means people running around killing each other, eating each other, whatever.
They think it's G7, G8 meetings with people in black outfits smashing McDonald's up. That's
right. Okay. It means an archon, so no ruler, basically. So it's rules, not rulers, as we often say in Bitcoin. People can mutually agree to rules, right? There's a million examples of this, but that's fine. That's how we organize ourselves. And so long as people have the right to say no and say, this rule set doesn't work for me, I couldn't negotiate terms, but I can go over to this jurisdiction and solve it that way. I think that's the way we sort ourselves out. But to say that it's not possible, I would agree with the Bitcoiners that we've not had the tools in place, because what do we always have? We have human beings attempting to get something for nothing. The easiest path to that, if you're the monopolist on violence, is to monopolize the money. So we've had always the state monopolizing the money. That leads to the business cycle, boom and bust business cycle, misallocation of capital. I would also say the bust of like ancient Rome, right? They debased their currency, the civilization collapses. So we've been sawing off the very branch on which we've been building civilization time and time and time again.
I agree.
And the trick has been, how do we bootstrap ourselves out of this? And it seems like the only way we've been able to do that so far is with technology. But by technology, I don't just mean tangible technology. I mean these social technologies we're talking about as well, which I would put democracy in there. Democracy is an improvement, right, than just the big guy model of communism. There's this book, The Discovery of Freedom, written by Rose. And she talks about basically every mode of human organization being communism until we got to democracy. So it's just like you lived in I toured this Hawaiian village when I was there a few months ago. And there's different houses, this is where the women made the food. This is where the guys ate the food. This is where they had recreation. And then you go to the big guy's house, the guy with the big stick. And he's in like the nicest house. And, he's the government, basically. He's the local little monopolist on violence in this village of 100 people or whatever it was. So he was the state. And essentially, that's how humans organize themselves everywhere, right? We are primates. We do organize ourselves in these hierarchies. But that doesn't mean that's very animalistic, right? We've sort of scaled out of that going into democracy now. We have this 330 million people nation state in the US. We were able to achieve economic abundance through life, liberty, property, like respecting these deep principles of Western civilization that are built on top of Christianity, I would argue.
You believe that's how the US became the dominant?
I don't see how you argue it any other way, because what violating property rights to 100% does.
Yeah,
we just described that. You're a slave. There's no accumulation of wealth. There's no upward social mobility whatsoever. So what is the opposite of that? If you have perfected private property rights and everything that you work to produce and create value in the world, you get to keep and trade it with other self-owned people, That's how we increase the division of labor and wealth in the world.